alihi washabihi ajmain. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera and a very good morning to all of you. Yang saya hormati Bu Rektor dan pimpinan manajemen UPNV, seterusnya Bapak Dekan dan rakan-rakan saya, members of the panels, tuan-tuan, puan-puan. Kalau di Malaysia tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, kalau di Indonesia bapak-bapak ibu ya, saudara dan saudari yang saya hormati sekalian. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to express my heartfelt gratitude for the invitation from the rector and also from the School of or the Faculty of International Affairs, University Pembangunan Nasional, for inviting me to speak at this forum or this conference, and also tomorrow I have another task to deliver to the university. But as of for today, I'll be speaking about the making of Bangsa Malaysia. I think you are quite familiar with the notion or the concept of Bangsa. Bangsa means the people, which is different from citizenship. Citizenship is, kewarganegaraan, being a citizen of a country. But being a nation is rather a different thing, whereby you can exist in multiple identity. All of us, we carry multiple identity. By multiple identity means that we can be an Indonesian at one level, but at another level we can be a Javanese or a Sundanese or Balinese, and then a Sumatranese. Kemudiannya, when we look into a much smaller group, in Sumatra you have so many ethnic communities. So if we meet someone in London or in New York, for example, we'll be asking that person, are you from Indonesia or maybe from Malaysia? If you ask them where you're from, they will definitely identify themselves as from Indonesia, because that is much easier to identify with and to make people know about it, because people know Indonesia more than Sundanese, But later when you arrive in Cengkareng, in Soekarno-Hatta, when you met an Indonesian, definitely they will not be asking you, at the immigration, they will not be asking you, are you Indonesian? Definitely they know that you are an Indonesian. But they will ask you, Bapak, Ibu dari mana? And therefore the answer would be, saya dari Jawa. Yeah. And then, or maybe saya dari Bali, atau saya dari Jawa Barat, begitu. Kemudian ditanya lagi, ya, Jawa Barat di mana itu? Saya di Cirebon. Ya, jadi kemudian di Cirebon di mana? Kampung mana? Jadi itulah maksud saya. That is the meaning of multiple identities that we are carrying all the time, most of the time. At one level, at supra level, we are Indonesian or Malaysian. At another level, we are another community with another group at another level. And then it goes down the level until we can identify with anybody, and we say, saya ini anak si itu si ini, ya, saya dari kampung ini. Which village you coming from? Or finally you'll be asking, you anak siapa? Ini anak siapa? Oh, anak bapak itu. Itukah? That's the meaning of identity. Yeah. Now, there's no problem about it. There's no issue about it. But the issues start to arrive, start to cause a problem when your attachment with your own community is much stronger than your attachment with the national identity. That will make, which will make national unity, national integration a problem. In Indonesia, you have quite resolved those issues. Back in 1945, Soekarno decided that Pancasila, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, satu bangsa, satu bahasa. But in Malaysia, we are not quite successful in doing that. Because when we achieved our independence in 1957, we allow all the major ethnic communities uh, to be on their own. They can establish their own schools, vernacular school with their own languages. In fact, at the very beginning, even their curriculum also, on their own, not similar to the national curriculum. And then they can live within their own community. So these things started during the colonial era, during the rule of the British. We were under the British before. But this thing, we hope that can be resolved. But unfortunately, it can't. It can't. Because of some political arrangement, this cannot be done. So we allow other ethnic communities, apart from or beside the national curriculum, national schools, we have other vernacular schools, Chinese school, Indian school. Yeah, the major one are the Chinese and Indian school. They can go to their own schools from kindergarten up to university. And when they complete their high school, they can go and study in Taiwan or in China or in wherever place they want. As for the Malays, they also have their national school, but they also go to religious school. So these are the things that make the formation of national identity somewhat problematic. So let me can we go back to the first slide, please? I would like to quote this, to start with my argument or my presentation. At the heart of any discussion of the nation and nationalism lies the issue of identity. Because identity is something which is embedded in ourselves. It is difficult, for us to be told and to be asked, please remove your identity. Jangan jadi Jawa lagi, jadi Indonesia. That's not possible. It's not possible, We can eat, our other foods from other community. But it is quite difficult if you say to someone, you have to leave your own community and become just a national community. That is very difficult. You just try to do it in any country. It won't happen. Yeah? But what is more important is to identify strongly, collectively, at the national level, so that you slowly beginning to, to release or to detach your attachment with your own community. Of course, we identify where we originated from, but we have to give priority to the national identity. So, in Malaysia, the politics of identity illustrate the prevailing contradiction of various notions of nation of intent, both within and between ethnic groups. This is the thing that I'm going to discuss in the next 15 minutes or so. So, can we go to the next slide, please? I will start my presentation by giving you a little bit of the background of Malaysia for those who are not familiar with the history and the background of the country. Of course, many of you here from Indonesia, maybe you know more or less about Malaysia, but deep inside the community, probably not many that realize what I'm going to present to you. And then I will touch a little bit on the post-independence politics of identity. What happened to the country after we received independence from the British in 1957? And then about the nation-building agenda after independence, and especially after 1970. Something happened in 1969 in Malaysia, and after 1970, things started to change because the country started to do something with regard to nation-building. And then here comes the project of Bangsa Malaysia. This project of Bangsa Malaysia, the formation of a united Malaysian nation, which I wrote in my book in English, but it has been translated into Bahasa Indonesia. I'm not trying to sell my book here, actually. I'm just telling you that you can get the copy of it in Gramedia. It was translated in Bahasa Indonesia. I translated this into Bahasa Malaysia, Bahasa Melayu. But when I asked my colleague, my friend from Indonesia to read, they said Bahasa Melayu susah, Pak, nggak bisa dipahami. Jadi, ya, translate aja dalam bahasa Indonesia. Jadi ini bisa dibaca, ya. Di Gramedia kurang pasti masih ada lagi atau tidak, tapi sudah lebih 10.000 yang terjual. Saya dapat banyak juga uang dari Indonesia. You can read that so that you can understand, what I'm talking about. And then the project of Bangsa Malaysia actually a brainchild of Mahathir, Tun Mahathir, Dr. Mahathir. when he introduced Vision 2020, Wawasan 2020 back in 1990, he attempted to propose that in 30 years' time, we should have a Bangsa Malaysia. By 2020, he said. 2020 is just a few months away. But, even the shadow of Bangsa Malaysia is still not there. So, still a long way to go. And then, what's left for us, if that is the situation? All right, let's go very, very quickly to the background, please. Next slide, please. Now, this is Malaysian society. This is so-called Malaysian nation, where we are currently at 32 million, much smaller than it, nothing to compare to Indonesia. We just, very little, very small. And then, out of these 32 million, the Malays, orang Melayu, consists or form about 50.1%. Orang Melayu bukan majority, hanya 50%. 50.1%. And of course, the Malays in Malaysia legally defined, there must be a Muslim. It is quite unique. You don't have this in Indonesia. In Malaysia, it is clearly defined in our constitution that orang Melayu mesti berbahasa Melayu, mesti beragama Islam, dan harus bertutur bahasa Melayu dan mengamalkan adat istiadat Melayu. Salah satu kurang, you are no longer a Malay. Meaning to say that if you are no longer a Muslim, you are not a Malay. If you don't practice or you don't speak in Malay or you don't practice Malay custom, Malay way of life, you are no longer a Malay according to the law, according to the constitution. It was clearly defined in the constitution. So for a Malay people, they are legally defined as a Muslim. So Malay Muslim, they are interchangeably, they are in Malaysia majority Malays, not say majority, all Malays are Muslim, right? Now, the Chinese, ethnic Chinese who came to Malaya in the late 19th centuries or mid-19th centuries, they form about 22.6%. The number of Chinese is declining because of the low birth rate. But even the Malays also now have less children. I came from a family of 9, but I only have 4 kids. My kid will probably have only 1 or 2, That's the nature now, So, as for the Chinese community, religiously, it's quite complicated. Mainly they are Buddhists, Some practice Taoist and so on. But many Chinese are now, they converted into Christianity. But many are now Christians, But it's difficult, to tell you because they won't tell you in open, As for the Malays, of course, they are Muslim. They will not go to a non-halal shop and drink alcohol and so on, because it was understood well in Malaysia. Maybe outside Malaysia, that one I don't know, And for the, we have also Bumi Putra, son of the soil. This refers to ethnic community in Sabah and Sarawak, in the 2 Borneo states, Sabah and Sarawak. They are called Bumi Putra. But within this Bumi Putra community, you have so many ethnic community. You have Iban, you have Melanau, you have Murut, you have Bajau, you have Kadazan Dusun, about 40 small, much smaller ethnic group. About 40. The main one, about 3 or 4. And they practice different religions. Some Christian, some animism, some has got no religion, some Muslim, some, so many religions. It's difficult to identify them by their religion. And the Indian, orang India, in Malaysia, there are mainly Hindus, but you have also India Muslim, an Indian from India who are a Muslim that open a mamak shop, the mamak nasi kandar, if you go to Malaysia, And there are also some Christian among the Indian community. And you have also other groups like Sikh, Punjabi, and other smaller groups. And we have also the non-citizen, about 8 million, coming from so many countries, Indonesia, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan. Foreigners in Malaysia, about 8 million. It's a lot. Now, this is the background. Okay, we go very quickly. Time is running out. Okay, next slide, please. Now, this is a bit of a glimpse of history of Malaysia. intend to go into detail because it will take you another 1 hour to finish this. Let me just say that we started a long time ago. In Malaysia, it's not Malacca. It was Kedah Tua, the old Kedah kingdom. We started much older than Jesus Christ. You know, the civilization just been found in Kedah, near Mount Jerai, Gunung Jerai, very old. Yeah, they call it Kedah Tua. This is a Malay kingdom, Malay Hindu kingdom, where you can find the largest iron ore industry, the largest in the world. They just been discovered, yeah, in the kaki Gunung Jerai, yeah, near Gunung Jerai in Kedah, yeah. And then the Sriwijaya, which you know better, you know well, Sriwijaya. We were part of Sriwijaya in the 17th and up to 13th century. And then here comes the Malacca Empire, Malacca state. Malacca was so big and so popular, and even the Europeans know Malacca very, very well. And because of that, the Portuguese came. Yeah, because Tom Pires, one historian from Europe, I think Tom Pires might be a Portuguese. He wrote in one of his writings that anybody control Malacca, they control Venice at that time. Because Malacca is the trade center of the region at that time, where you have entry port, you have trade coming from China, from everywhere. You know, and then Malacca is an entry port, and from Malacca, things were distributed all over the world, especially spices and so on. So, according to Tom Pires, whoever controlled Malacca, they control Venice, and that made the European who would like to come here. So it started with the Portuguese in 1511. We have war with the Portuguese, and the Portuguese colonized Malacca, and also part of Malaya for a few hundred years. So we were under the Portuguese, under these Cristiano Ronaldo descendants. Yeah? And don't forget, not only Indonesia were under the Dutch, we were under the Dutch also. Yeah? Together, we were under the Dutch. Much longer than that. 1641, the Dutch defeated the Portuguese. We were under the Dutch for Belanda, yeah? For a few hundred years. Yeah? And then when there was a peace treaty, the Anglo-Dutch Treaty in 1824, here comes the demarcation between Malaysia and Indonesia now. Whichever area that is under the Dutch, later known as Indonesia, and whichever area under the British, known as Malaya in this region. So, after the treaty, the British hand over areas that they control to the Dutch, and the Dutch hand over area that they control to the British. So we were under the British until we achieved independence in 1957. In 1957, we achieved independence, and 1963, Malaysia was formed. We achieved independence as Malaya, Tanah Melayu, Persekutuan Tanah Melayu. And then in 1963, Singapore, Sabah and Sarawak come in, and we formed Malaysia. Originally, it was Brunei as well, but Brunei decided not to join later. So Malaysia was formed only in 1963. And when Singapore, came in, there was a quarrel between Lee Kuan Yew and Tunku Abdul Rahman, and later they decided to separate, to divorce, talak tiga, cerai terus, yeah. And then Singapore was separated in 1965 and became, republic until now, but they are still our neighbor. And Malaysia only left with Malaya, Sabah, and Sarawak. Okay, that is the political boundary. Yeah. Okay, quickly, the politics now. When we achieved independence, the cooperation between the British give one condition. The British said that we will not give you independence until the Malays can prove to the British, to them, that you can also, number one, include the Chinese and Indian as citizens, and number two, rule the country together. You must form a coalition. Otherwise, I will not give you independence. So the Malays are not that brave enough like Indonesia. Indonesia with bambu runcing, you fought the Belanda. We are more diplomatic. We said, okay, no problem. We accept the Chinese and Indian. Yeah, we give them citizenship, and they will rule the country together. So a political party was formed, Perikatan Alliance, yeah, between UMNO, representing the Malays, MCA, Malaysian Chinese Association, representing ethnic Chinese, and MIC, Malaysian Indian Congress, it was Malayan at that time, yeah, representing the Indians. So Sabah Sarawak was not in the picture yet. Wow, 5 minutes, okay. I'm not yet coming to the peak yet. So the country were ruled by Perikatan, and at that time we are quite democratic. And because of that, many issues that has been resolved during independence were brought up again, especially by political parties in the opposition, and things was not being well managed. We were facing the communists at that time, so ethnic issue has been played in politics so badly. Ethnic political mobilization was so bad. We have opposition, past Islamic party who challenged UMNO using Malay Islamic issues, and you have several non-Malay parties trying to outdo MCA using ethnic issues, and you have also other opposition parties trying to woo the India using ethnic issues. So ethnic issues has been played in politics, and therefore in 1969 you have this riot, ethnic clash in Malaysia. It was bad, it's quite bad, yeah. 1969, curfew was imposed, and Malaysia democracy was suspended for 21 months, and the state of emergency was declared at that time. And we find ways to resolve this so that we don't have another clash after this. Okay, quickly. Yeah. Now, the country actually, apart from parliamentary democracy, we are also, we call it consociational democracy. By consociational democracy, what I'm trying to explain to you is that the federal government must be a representation of all major ethnic communities. You cannot allow any single ethnic community to feel that they are not part of the government. They are not represented at the federal level. So that's why this coalition, Perikatan is a coalition of 3 parties at that time. So after ethnic riot of 1969, these Perikatan were extended, were enlarged, yeah, so that more parties, less extremist party were invited, and the new party was formed. A new coalition party was formed called the Barisan Nasional. Yeah, Barisan Nasional, the National Front. From 3 parties, it became 13 parties. So the Barisan Nasional ruled the country from 1973 until they lost to a new party formed by Dr. Mahathir, Pakatan Harapan, another coalition party, last year in May 2018, that ended the 61 years rule of UMNO and Perikatan and Barisan Nasional. Now, that's why after 1969, you can see that the country moved from almost, full democracy into a quasi-democracy. Because the state wants to control certain element of ethnic political mobilization. They try to depoliticize ethnicity from politics, and then more rule or laws were introduced and imposed to curtail ethnic issues from being brought up into politics, right? So this is the situation that we are facing, from democracy to quasi, half democracy. Some people say authoritarian, yeah? And then politically, economically, also quite unique in Malaysia. Just like in Indonesia, maybe, politically, the Malays were quite dominant. But economically, the Chinese, ethnic Chinese, were more superior. Ethnic Chinese by then, and even until now, control more than 70% of the economy. Whereas Malay, control the politics and the administration. So this is another dichotomy that we are facing. And then, next one, please, quickly. Time is running out. And then, after a big victory won by Abdullah Badawi in 2004, after Mahathir left office, Abdullah started to democratize the country, right? Under Najib, also more democratization, but still, quite a number of laws still there, still remain there, yeah? But because of the digital era, the new media, the social media, and so on, and also Najib government faced, one big problem, one scandal, this one MDB issue still going on in the court until today, not yet finished. And also when Najib introduced GST to stop Malaysia from relying too much on the petroleum, on oil, the people, the rakyat were not happy. So because of that, Najib government lost for the first time in the election, and you have this new party, Pakatan Harapan, under Dr. Mahathir, who already joined the opposition because he was not happy with Najib. Now, after that, because of the new media, you can see that this cyber politics, started to allow this ethnic political mobilization. You go into the internet, people talk of so many ethnic issues, sensitive issues that never been talked about before, and this has caused, tension in the country. And as of now, as you can see, we are still grappling with this issue. Ethnic parties still exist. Ethnic issue is still, within the mainstream. All issues were perceived in ethnic terms. And although at surface, you can see that Malaysia more or less stable politically, but undercurrent, you can see that this ethnic political mobilization is still going on. So this project of Bangsa Malaysia, quickly, the next slide, please. Yeah, next slide, quickly. So this, after independence and after Bangsa Malaysia were introduced, we are in a situation of one state with many nations. So the Chinese have their own vision of what Malaysian nation should be. The Malays has got their own vision. Even within the Malays, there are the ideology of PAS, the ideology of UMNO. PAS want an Islamic state. UMNO say, okay, Malay-led government is okay. The Chinese want Malaysia, everyone is equal, every religion is equal. Some Chinese say, okay, they can integrate with the Malays. You go to Sabah and Sarawak, they do not want to accept Malayners and also Malay Islam political identity because they are not Malays, they are Bumi Putra. So these are the situations that we are facing. So every ethnic community hope and aspire that Malaysian nation, Bangsa Malaysia, would be their version of Bangsa Malaysia. So you have so many versions of Bangsa Malaysia, not one version. So therefore, we are still negotiating, we are still discussing, we are still, moderating all these things. So mediating identities and mediating these differences is still a major thing that we are facing. And that's why I say that the Bangsa Malaysia is still in the making. We have not yet resolved this issue. Even by next year, 2020, we are still very far away. It may take, another 50 years or maybe 100 years. I don't know, because the process of ethnogenesis of a nation will take much longer time. We can have it if we resort to assimilation. But assimilation has not been a process in Malaysia. We allow a political accommodation, and this is the real situation that we have to face. So with that, I end my session, my talk, and I would welcome if you have any question, to ask further about Bangsa Malaysia and the political situation in Malaysia. I will try my very best. With that, I thank you so much, and I hope you at least get the gist of the idea that I want to share with you today. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullah.
Thank you very much, Professor Dato Sri Dr. Muhammad Mustafa. So it was very interesting presentation. Like previously, we've heard about the formation of national identity from Professor Akihisa and from Professor Mustafa. We heard that context and representation matters. And next, we would like to welcome Dr. Philippe Rongier to go with the presentation.
With the presentation screen, not this one. You have to click on it. Not yet. Here you are. Okay. Thank you for this invitation, Ms. Rector. And I just wonder what I am doing here. I'm a linguist, and you all are in political sciences. Yeah? What does a linguist, what can a linguist bring to this debate? Well, as was said, identity is very important, and one key element of identity is language. Not much was said about language, so I will go through two examples, Europe and Indonesia, regarding national language, regional language, and their respective position. And one of the questions I will address is, will Indonesia do the same mistakes as France? And I will take an example. Okay, here we are. Okay, you may wonder why in Europe we have so few languages. Europe is a huge continent, and we only have 3% of all the languages. We have around 6,000 languages today in the world. It's decreasing, but in Europe only 3%. And basically, this is the European Union, but you may have the same map, approximately the same map for languages. I mean, if you superpose political boundaries and linguistic boundaries, you have about the same. This was not the case before. We had plenty of languages we had in Europe, just like in Indonesia now, a big linguistic diversity. What has happened? Let's, before... Okay, what's happening? Okay. Let's say Indonesia has let's take an example of a Gorontalo person who may know languages in Manado or Minahasa and so on, and then this device doesn't work. Could you ini dicopot, dipasang lagi itu yang apa remote-nya yang hitam itu yang kecil. Beliau itu this man can speak Manadanese and of course Indonesian. So this is called sistem gravitasi bahasa. This means one individual speaks several languages, and the more languages he speaks, the more people he can interact with. So if you speak a lot of languages, you can interact with a lot of people. If you are monolingual, you can only interact with people who share the same language. So that's what the model before, long time before in Europe, people spoke at least 2 languages and very often 3 languages. This is not more the case. These are the languages now spoken in Europe, and it's almost corresponding to political boundaries. So why why Europe has become so poor in languages? So this has, of course, to do with history. Okay, that was France before revolution in 230 years ago, and we had many regional languages. So what happened? We had before the language, one of the regional languages, which was around Paris, which happened to become the national language, but just for historical and strategical reasons. Someone has said a national language is the language of the community which owns an army. Okay. So military power does influence the choice of... doesn't work. Right. Okay, so next, so I have to... this is the King of France, François Ier, the first who decided now the language of France will be French, not anymore Latin. So all the laws has to be translated in French. Next. Next again, bahasa daerah lokal or local languages, only one became the national language. It means the other one, it's not the best languages of France, but just it happened to be the language of the king, the language of the business, and so on. Oh, what's happening? Okay, next. Next. So it involves the disparition of many languages. Next. For instance, in the southwest of France. Next. And this person was the prime ministry at the beginning of the 17th century, and who decided to unify the French language so that it becomes really a national language. This is only a beginning. Next. And he founded the Académie Française, or a kind of, you have, like you have in Indonesia, Badan Bahasa, or Badan Pengembangan dan Pembinaan Bahasa. That was about the same, just to standardize French language, and especially the spelling of French, which was absolutely free before, and the spelling was fixed at that time, and did not evolve since. That French language evolved, but not the spelling. This is why today it's you have to, if you learn French, you have to struggle with the spelling, which is absolutely not logical and doesn't resemble with the phonology. Next. And French Revolution gave a last attack on the regional language, because the revolutionaries decided that only French language was to be the language of the French Republic. And then, next, they had, after having killed the king, Louis XVI, next, they decided to promote French language, and not only promote French language as a national language, but also eradicate, memusnahkan regional languages. And hopefully this has not happened in Indonesia, to my knowledge, but at that time this was a conscious, a political a policy of French to eradicate regional languages, which were seen as backwards, as enemies of the nation. And you have here a school master with I won't translate it, about importance of school. This is for children, school children. This is about 100 years ago. What is il est défendu means dilarang. You must not do that. And what is interesting in the first interdiction is forbidden to speak Breton and spit Meludah. So it's the same to speak a regional language and Meludah. So you see that it's absolutely bad to speak a regional language, just as impolite or uneducated as spitting. Next. So what happened? French won and killed, literally killed, almost all regional languages that you see on the red crosses. There is now in France only maybe 4 surviving regional languages, and they are just surviving in, let's say, in artificial surviving. Next. What it is about? Nationalism. So, as was said, identity, if you have identity, you have many symbols. The imagined history, you have an history, and the history you imagine for your country. And the same applies for language. You have imagined language. If you speak with Indonesian, they have a vision of their own language, national language, Bahasa Indonesia, and they say our language is so, and it's mostly subjective. It's not for the linguistic point of view, this is not always accurate. So, not too fast. Here you have two posters. The left one is French newspaper, seeing the French soldiers being calm and stand up against the German who are very angry and violent and aggressive. So language was in Europe very important for nationalism, as being French meant to speak French and not to speak German, and being German was meant to speak German and not the other languages. And this is because of the nationalism that most of the European became monolingual. And it's a sad story, not only because the millions of dead of the First World War, where you had millions of young people who were killed or wounded, two generations, in fact, in the last century, and it ended up exactly 101 years ago, on the 11th November 1918, the First World War came to this end. And nationalism has to do with the language, and language is a tool of nationalism. Next. So this is why in Europe, if you go to Paris, you will hardly find people speaking English, except in hotels or restaurants, but most of the French people do not speak foreign languages. It's improving, but not really easy to find English speakers in France. As you may hear from my accent, English is absolutely not my mother tongue. Now you have this situation in Europe, which is inherited from the last century. We became monolingual because for us a nation has a set of identity symbol which was very simple, flag, hymn, language, and other symbols like our history, our imagined history, our heroes, Pahlawan, and so on. And this does that all the other languages were noted as not as beautiful as our language. And now it's a pity that most of the Spanish only speak Spanish, most of the French only speak French, and so on. Next. And so this is just an example. The green one is one of the regional language, a region which I come from, but I absolutely cannot speak this language, which is today one of the example of the extinct regional language of France. Next. What remains from that, for example, food, and you have difference in the kind of food you eat, and the differences, some differences also in the accent of the people still remains, still recall the past of the regional language. But today we can see France is totally monolingual, and the last regional language are only spoken by very old persons. Next. So if we see the situation in Indonesia you have more than 600 languages. If we can say that every year in Indonesia you have 2 or 3 languages which disappear, which are extinct, because the last person who speaks the language dies, and so it's over. And fortunately, Europe and Indonesia had a very different policy because as you say, in Indonesia, utamakan bahasa Indonesia, lestarikan bahasa daerah, kuasai bahasa asing. So the second one, lestarikan bahasa daerah, was the exact opposite of the French policy, which was destroy regional languages because they are against the national unity. Hopefully, Indonesia does not the same mistake, and this is a very good thing. Next. Of course, there is still a challenge in Indonesia, which is to save the last languages, the languages which are on the brink of extinction, mostly in the eastern part of Indonesia. This is not easy to salvage a regional language. But next, if we see the example of a language, one of the numerous languages, which is Lamaholot, spoken in Eastern Flores. Next, there you have about 200,000 speakers of this language. You would think that it's in danger of extinction. It is not. It's very strong. Every people in the Lamaholot linguistic area, every day they speak Lamaholot at home, at the office too, for the religion purposes. So it's very, very strong. Don't think that the smaller language is the most threats there are on it. I mean, the Lamaholot is the example of a small regional language which is very strong. And I don't see why it could disappear, because it's strong because people speak it on a regular basis, daily basis. Next. Languages who have more than 100,000 speakers can be seen on Wikipedia. It's very interesting. It's a kind of measure of what's going on for a language. I mean, if a language is already on the internet, on the web, people do send WhatsApp or whatever in this regional language, and you have Wikipedia pages in this language, we can consider this language is still strong, still healthy, and will not disappear within 1 or 2 generations. Next. In Indonesia, there is some effort to salvage and to teach several languages. But if you see, this is my, I worked with Badan Bahasa, and even Badan Bahasa does not know exactly which regional languages are taught in Indonesia. But if there is, let's say, there are 30 or 40 regional languages which are taught at school, this is very small compared to the 600 more languages you have. But still, there is an effort to maintain and to help this regional language. Next. And so could we say that Bahasa Jawa, for instance, is of course stronger than Bahasa Lamaholot? Don't think that the regional languages with millions of speakers are stronger than small regional languages. This is exactly the contrary. A big language like Javanese or Sundanese are in danger. In let's say in 2 or 3 generations, they may not completely disappear, but really not be used on a daily basis. Why? This is because they are huge and they are not limited to a small region. Lamaholot is limited to the Pulau Adonara, Solor, and Eastern Flores. This is boundaries are very clear, and there people speak Lamaholot, and only there. But Javanese, you have Javanese people everywhere. You have dialects within Javanese languages, and it's more in danger than smaller regional languages. So next, if we if we see particularly on the Javanese, the problem, the issue is that you have several layers of vocabulary, Jawa Ngoko, Madya, Ingil, and sometimes Javanese don't, I'm not sure what layer, what kind of language should they use with other people, so they prefer to speak Indonesian rather than doing mistakes, speaking Ngoko to Sultan, for instance. So Javanese is in danger, really, not Lamaholot. This is paradoxical, but you may say that people living in cities, especially Jakarta, they have a new motto, bahasa Indonesia diutamakan, bahasa daerah diabaikan, bahasa asing dicekokkan, mau nggak mau gitu. And that's the new motto, and I'm not very happy with that, but that's a reality. Unfortunately, I meet rather often very young Indonesian. Their bahasa Indonesia is weak, it's not very beautiful. They are more comfortable speaking English. So I just wonder, hey, is there a new colonization in Indonesia? Nobody told me. What is it about? And it's really a pity that, but this is only Jakarta, is a very rich people in Jakarta. Next. So if we see what languages, what regional languages are in danger, you have this paradox that languages, and don't too fast, no, stop. Next, stop. Okay, maybe this works. The most left column is small languages, regional languages in Indonesia under 100,000 speakers are in danger because it's very little, very small communities, and they are eager to switch to another language, which can be Indonesian, but which can be a regional lingua franca like Manado Malay or like Kupang Malay. The middle part, so regional languages between 100,000 and 1 million speakers are the strongest in Indonesia. I'm sure they won't disappear within several generations. And the biggest regional languages where you have, as we have seen, about 12 big regional languages spoken by more than 1 million, they are in danger. The bigger they are, the tighter is the competition with Indonesia, with Indonesian. I mean, Javanese is in competition with Indonesian, but Lamaholot in Flores is not in competition with Indonesian because people are bilingual and they speak the two languages without any problem. So this is, I understand that this may rise some debates, and this is not intuitive because we could think the bigger you are, the stronger you are, but this is not the case for regional languages in Indonesia. Next. Bad news for you, Bahasa Indonesia is in danger, but only in Jakarta Pusat. This is my remark. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Philippe Rongier. That was a very insightful presentation about how a nation has a set of values and identity and how it relates to the language that is being spoken in that country. So now, next, we would like to welcome Mr. Sehaye Behrekidan Mekonnen. The floor is yours.
Dr. Irna, Rector of UPN, leadership, distinguished professors, speakers, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Mine is more political than language, but it also contains language because language is a core element of identity, and identity, as we all know, is very crucial, not only in national politics, but also in international relations. I hope you have either read or seen Clash of Civilizations, the core of which is identity also. So identity is not only a problem in Malaysia or Ethiopia, but in the whole world. But I'm nearly representing a continent, Africa, and I would like to officially request the timekeeper to be generous because Africa is a big continent with huge problems and huge opportunities. I would like to point out that mine is smaller in scope, not the whole of Africa, but the Horn of Africa, where Ethiopia is located. And I would like to point out briefly about the Horn of Africa in terms of state formation and self-determination, where all of the states of the Horn of Africa were colonies of the UK, France, and Italy, except Ethiopia. That exception has a meaning. When Sudan was liberated, by the way, Sudan was ruled by the British as two separate entities, not as one. So Sudan was liberated in 1956 as one state, but because of the incompatibility of culture, that is identity, there was a national movement called Anania. Ethiopia mediated with the national movement leaders and the government, which was broadly Arabic. Then in 1972, they reached agreement for autonomy, but that agreement was short-lived. Then they continued for long and they paid a heavy price and now seceded from South Sudan. Now they are independent state. Again, Somalia was a colony of two powers, the UK and Italy. The northern part was under British and the southern under Italian. When they liberated from UK and Italy, they were independent states for 5 days. And then they come together and created the Republic of Somalia. But Somalia was under challenge, and now the Somaliland is almost seceded, is a de facto state. Again, Ethiopia included also Eritrea. The Eritreans fought for 30 years. Then they seceded in 1993. So in the Horn of Africa, we have 2.5 states now seceded. So this direction of disintegration of states, I would like to ask, when will it stop? On the other hand, you have also integration of regional states. We have the IGAD, if you have heard. IGAD is an association of states, 7 or 8 states. So hopefully integration will be overtaking, not disintegration. So is that the case when it comes to Ethiopia? And that is my presentation today. The title of my presentation is Self-Determination and National Unity. That is why I said it's not about language, about culture, about identity, but self-determination in terms of identity, culture, language is very important. But since Ethiopia is not a creation of yesterday, it's the longest history in statehood, I would like to point out briefly on the evolution, the political evolution of Ethiopia. I have divided in 2 stages. The first stage is the ancient stage, and the second one is the modern stage. But I would like to point out that 2 things need to be underscored of this presentation. One is the perceptive framework of national unity. What is the basis of national unity in Ethiopia, as well as in Indonesia or Malaysia or anywhere in the world? The second one is, what is the basis of self-determination? The ancient Ethiopia is related with the Aksumite kingdom. The Aksumite kingdom was in the northern part of Ethiopia, but before Aksum, there was also another set called the Amat. The Amat was a primary state. It was a primary state. Then came the Aksum kingdom. In the Aksumite kingdom, you have major achievements. One, the invention of Ge'ez script. Ge'ez script is, Ethiopia is having now its own national script. The script on my necktie, all of the world are using the English script, but we have our own script. I will show you later on, and it was invented during the Aksumite kingdom. Second one is, what was the extent, the limit, geographic limit of Aksum? Aksum that existed for more than 1,000 years included areas today under Eritrea, Ethiopia, the whole current Ethiopia, Djibouti, Somalia, Sudan, Egypt, Yemen, and it extended as far as Saudi Arabia. It had a naval power, launched military operation as far as Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia of today was different during the Aksumite Empire. The Aksumite kingdom shrinked in terms of geography because of Muslim pressure and also a military blow up from a nearby rival power called Falasha. The Falasha have known a long resistance against imperial incursions. I will mention it later. Then Aksum fall down, then came the Zagwe dynasty, still in Ethiopia. The Zagwe dynasty is a successor of the Aksumite kingdom. Then I would like to proceed on modern Ethiopia, related to the coming of imperial powers to Africa. When the whole Africa was colonized, Ethiopia was not colonized, maintained its political independence, survived. Then Ethiopia had so many kingdoms, internal kingdoms, small, as well as sultanates and principalities. All these were ruled by the emperor at the head. Then I would like to point out the key features of this empire that affected the state building process. Number one, there was nobility and monarch conflict between the center and the peripheries. The entire, as you can see, it was divided during the Solomonic dynasty. It was divided into 3 consecutive circles, at the core of which is the core of the kingdom. That is the Amhara-dominated kingdom. It was then the first circle consists of Tigray, present Tigray, and Eritrea. The second circle is the largest part of the kingdom, and the third circle is territories beyond the emperor. It looks like a chemistry. When you go up outer the shell of the structure of a chemical compound, then the relationship between the core and the outer becomes loose. And the relationship between the core and the next circle is strong. But in this regard, the relationship between the core and the first circle was not so strong, but anyway, it formed the nucleus of Ethiopia. Then the second factor that affected the process of state building in Ethiopia is the Oromo migration. It was in a huge migration that covered almost the entire Ethiopia now, except Eritrea and Tigray. Only small part of Tigray, the Oromo migration was affected. It has an influence on current Ethiopia, on the makeup of Ethiopia. The third point that affected the nation-state building was the conflict between aristocracy and the loyalty of nobilities. Aristocracy includes all the military, the nobles, and also regional rulers. So the aristocracy was at times looking for its own self-interest, and that was dangerous for the monarch. And the monarch was at times being squeezed. And when squeezed, then the regional rulers will find space to extend their autonomy. By the way, the regional rulers had their own armies, and that factor was very, very important. Added together with aristocratic and ambiguous loyalty of the nobles, then always the monarch was always in challenge. Within that context given, then there were also foreign invasions. Ethiopia has fought more than 40 international wars. 40. With the Turkish, with the Italians, with Egypt. We have not fought with the British. The British, there is one case, but mostly there was cooperation with them, especially in World War II. So the Ethiopian population, the regional rulers, nobles, they are called to stand behind the monarch to defend Ethiopia, and if any one of them defy, then that would be treason. Cases of treason in Ethiopia are very, very rare, but there can be some which are less in weight. So the hallmark of Ethiopian nationalism is the solidarity of all Ethiopians against foreign invasion. Added together with our geographic features, then Ethiopian independence was secured, and Ethiopia survived for long. And there is a book written by Scandinavian scholar called Survival of Ethiopian Independence. I think if there is in the library, you can have a look at this. Then I would like to come to post-imperial and federal Ethiopia. The conflict between the monarch and regional rulers was not settled when Emperor Haile Selassie collapsed. The regime collapsed. He was agile, more than 80. I think he was 85, and he was no more powerful to maintain. Actually, the military took over. The military junta called the Derg again ruled Ethiopia for another 17 years, where there were more than 17 different armed guerrilla fighters in Ethiopia, one of which is Eritrean, the other is Tigrayan, and also other. So the combined exertion of these powers forced the Derg regime to collapse. Then when Ethiopia collapsed, then where should be Ethiopia headed? The direction of Ethiopia was derailed, changed fundamentally. Three questions were on the table that need addressing. One is secession, the other is national question, and the third one is irredentism. National question, question of secession refers to the question raised by the Eritrean guerrilla fighters. Eritrea probably, you may remember, it was under the Italian colonial rule for 50 years, and the British also ruled Eritrea for 10 years, so total 60 years of colonial rule. Then, again, Eritrea came under federation with Ethiopia. That federation lasted only 10 years. Then Emperor Haile Selassie decided to abrogate the federal arrangement, and that was the cause for the rise of Eritreans for independence. Then heavy price was paid, and finally Eritrea seceded. The national question is a question raised by not only Tigray, but the entire nation's nationalities. We have more than 80 nations' nationalities in Ethiopia, and they were eager to have their own identity preserved for national self-determination. Then Ethiopia now, which has avoided monarchic and military power, has to be reframed. It was reframed, and federal state was the political arrangement that gave the basis for the creation of national regional states. Now we have 9 national regional states. They are the one who formed the federal state. Ours is like the Indian political structure, where you have states. Those states come together, then they create the union government, and the relationship between the union government and states is specified in the constitution. Now, in Ethiopia, as in Malaysia and Indonesia and other states, identity is very crucial. So I would like to focus on identity and the way, the principle that holds Ethiopia together now, and what self-determination is all about. Identity for us is not subject to negotiation. I have heard from the previous speakers that there is going on negotiation among different stakeholders, but identity is not like a commodity or economic resource that can be negotiated. Absolutely no. It has to be respected. It has to be respected. So mutual respect of different stakeholders, entities, will retain national unity. In Ethiopia, diversity in unity and unity in diversity are different things. When I say diversity in unity, and when someone else says unity in diversity, they are talking about two different things. The difference is that when you say diversity in unity, it is diversity-centric. When you say unity in diversity, it means unity-centric. So holding together is not a new concept. It is the opposite of coming together. Ethiopia was an ancient state. The only new thing in Ethiopia is the federal structure. So what has come new is the federal structure, not Ethiopia. Ethiopia was there. So what is needed is to hold Ethiopia together, but in what sense can be Ethiopia hold together? Ethiopia can stay together when sovereignty is centered at the people. If the people are owners of sovereignty and not anyone else, any group, takes them this sovereign power, then Ethiopia will continue. So Ethiopia is now characterized by, on the one hand, regionalization, and on the other, federalization. They go together. Now, the last element of my presentation is the future. What will be the future for Ethiopia? In order for Ethiopia to stay, then we need to democratize. Democratization is a key element. We need to democratize our history also, our thinking, our culture. Then we need also the constitutional patriotism, which is related to, okay, now I am under pressure. But I would like to conclude that national unity and self-determination, they cannot be alienated. They cannot be dissociated. They can only stay together, parallel together. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Mr. Sehaye. And now I would like to welcome the last speaker of this session, Dr. Sri Lestari Wahyuningrum.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi menjelang siang, salam sejahtera Bapak Ibu sekalian. Rektor UPN Ibu Dr. Erna, Bapak Wakil Rektor Dr. Antarvenus, Pak Satria, para jajaran pimpinan di UPN Veteran Jakarta, Pak Dudi, Dr. Dudi Heriadi, Dekan Visip UI, distinguished speakers, guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really feel honored today to share some of the thoughts on the topics with you. Kalau tadi kita sudah ke Afrika, ke Jepang, Korea, Perancis, jauh-jauh, Malaysia yang paling dekat, sekarang saya mau bawa Bapak Ibu sekalian ke tempat yang lebih dekat dengan kita, yaitu Aceh. Aceh, Nangro Aceh Darussalam. Ini adalah proyek yang sedang saya lakukan, riset yang sedang saya lakukan. Bahkan tadi malam sebetulnya saya baru pulang jam 9 dari Aceh untuk proyek ini. Dan mohon izin karena saya menyiapkan presentasinya dalam bahasa Inggris karena kebetulan draft ini yang sedang saya sempurnakan untuk publikasi. Okay, so without further ado, today I'll be talking about a process of healing and peaceful democracy in Aceh, the westernmost province in Indonesia, where identity is being redefined and transformed. This is a part of a research project that I have been engaged in the last 6 months, and as a matter of fact, I just got back from Aceh, the capital city, Banda Aceh, the capital city, just last night. By looking at Aceh's case, I'm hoping to put a piece of a big puzzle of how democratic mechanisms might contribute to better way of understanding identity and its relation to create a more peaceful world for us to live. Aceh is on its way to heal from past conflict where mass human rights abuses were involved. What is currently taking place there reflects the emerging global normative expectations related to the state's duty to come to terms with their violent legacies in order to sustain peaceful democracy and restore trust between society and state and between members of society. How the state and society attempt to deal with its past conflicts and violence is what commonly understood as transitional justice. And this is the area where I'm trying to build my expertise on. Transitional justice, in its simplest definition, according to a 2004 report of the UN Secretary General, is defined as the full range of processes and mechanisms associated with a society's attempt to come to terms with the legacy of large-scale past abuses in order to ensure accountability, serve justice, and achieve reconciliation. Attempt to settle cases of past injustices can take place through various measures and mechanisms. The mechanisms most referred to in the literature are those that involve prosecution, truth-seeking, reparations, and institutional reforms in the form of frustration of vetting. Prosecution aims at redressing the suffering of the victims and to provide opportunities to establish or strengthen the judicial system and the rule of law in transitional countries. Such efforts also aim at reflecting a new set of social norms based on respect for human rights and can be a starting point for a process of reforming and building trust in government institutions. Truth mechanisms are efforts to establish the truth about past abuses. They include the creation of Truth Commission, bodies that are tasked with uncovering what happened during human rights abuses, or other national and international efforts such as major historical research or documentation of violence and victims of violence and exhumations. In many contexts, truth comes together with reconciliations because most experts believe reconciliation can only be achieved if past suffering of victims is acknowledged. Reparation policies consider the physical requirements of or moral obligation to victims and survivors of abuses. Reparation can include economic compensation and non-material efforts, including symbolic recognition such as state apologies to and memorialization of victims. Meanwhile, experts believe reforming institutions that have histories of abusive behavior, including the security forces and related institutions, is necessary in order to prevent the recurrence of patterns of abuses and to establish a state-society relationship based on functioning and fair institutions. Other than these mechanisms, there have also been extensive studies and debates on amnesties and their roles in transitional justice implementations. Amnesty is defined as official state declaration that individuals or groups accused or convicted of committing human rights violation will not be persecuted or will be pardoned for their crimes and released from prison. Okay. Arguments for and against amnesties have been intense, which we can further discuss later. But globally, an increasing numbers of countries have adopted and implemented transitional justice mechanism. Seeking and Pain, for example, have created data sets on various mechanisms of transitional justice around the world. Their data show a positive worldwide trend in state efforts to enforce accountability on human rights crimes. Prosecution and amnesties are the two mechanisms where use has increased most. Human rights trials in particular have occurred at both domestic and international levels. In the Asia-Pacific, Jeffrey and Kim also show that increasing numbers of countries have adopted transitional justice mechanisms since the 1980s or late 1980s. The data set developed by Olson, Payne, and Reuters show that there is a growing trend for countries in the Asia-Pacific to institute more than one mechanism. The most commonly used mechanism in these countries has been trials, truth commissions, and amnesties. Indonesia is also included. So Indonesia is one of the many countries that have adopted more than one transitional justice mechanisms. And Aceh is one of them. I can talk more about transitional justice in Indonesia, but for now I will return my talk on Aceh. So for those who are not familiar, can you first slide, please? All right, so as you can see, for those who are not familiar, because I know some of you might not familiar with Aceh. Aceh is the westernmost province in Indonesia. It gained special autonomy in 2004 actually, but then Aceh had conflicts a few times, even before the Indonesian independence, with the longest one commenced in 1976 and lasted for 30 years. The Free Aceh movement, or Gerakan Aceh Merdeka atau GAM, strove to win Aceh's independence, but the Indonesian military fought to prevent the outcomes at all costs. In the process, violent abuses were committed on both sides, with GAM fighters trying to purge the province of Javanese and retaliating against traitors who betrayed the cause, and the TNI engaged in a protracted dirty war in which many thousands of civilians fell victim to arbitrary detention, torture, extrajudicial killing, and other forms of abuses. So the conflict ended in a peace agreement signed in August 2005 in Helsinki, almost a year after massive tsunami hit the province. So as you can tell, it was facilitated by Marty Antisari, a Nobel Peace nominator or Nobel Peace winner in 2004 in Helsinki. But interestingly, within that agreement, within that MOU, transitional justice was included. Some mechanisms were also inherently in the agreement. One of the points of the agreed was the establishment of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or TRC, to investigate the truth of past human rights violations during the conflict. The process of making the commissions was controversial by both Jakarta and former GAM members or figures, and they were opposed to it. After long due, the commission was eventually set up 3 years ago under the local bylaw, Kanun, and the law of government of Aceh, Undang-Undang Pemerintahan Aceh, or LOGA. Next. So as you can see there, the TRC, Aceh TRC, is mandated to look at violations committed by all sides of the conflict, but its proximity to victims means that it must find a pathway to provide urgent assistance and reparations for vulnerable victims, with emphasis on victims of torture, sexual violence, and those disabled. It has organized 2 public hearings and collect more than 2,000 testimonies of victims. So the TRC also developed a community reconciliation process between local perpetrators and victims in communities. Currently, the Commission is still undertaking research on this issue. And lastly, the Aceh Parliament went out on a limb and established the Commission as a permanent institution. So for your information, the Aceh TRC is the only one in the world which are set up permanently. So nowhere in the world has such commission on permanent basis, but most of them, or all of them, were established on ad hoc basis, so on a certain period of time. But Aceh, in the Kanun, well, there has been some controversial pros and cons on that, but the establishment of permanent TRC is a breakthrough in a way. So this is the first one in the world. How can these processes currently underway by the Aceh TRC can help to reform or reconstruct the identity of the Acehnese and their belongingness in the nation called Indonesia? First of all, of course, we need to acknowledge that identity is not static, identity is not stagnated. It is fluid and constantly being constructed over time, and it's given meaning by power relation around it. I think our previous speakers have already emphasized that, identity has never been stagnated. It's always been continuously on the making. Secondly, conflict in Aceh have been mostly around the resentment of identity politics or ethno-nationalist articulations. Inequality and exploitation of natural resources were some of the factors to start the conflict. But it was exactly identity politics that leveled it up to such a long conflict between the Aceh Free Movement and the Indonesian government. In that context, transitional justice is in its way to give new meaning of identity, which is based on accountability, justice, dignity, and humanity. The Aceh TRC, if properly done, can first promote trust and reduce fear. Many interventions in peace-building contexts, both by the state and civil society, revolve around trust-building activities between groups. The overarching goal of such activities is that people discover how to reframe problems of mutual concern through communication and cooperation. TRC potentially can contribute towards these ends. Trust of marginalized groups in the state may be enhanced. In general, through the efficient and culturally sensitive administration of a variety of justice initiatives. TRC can also contribute to building trust across groups. Indeed, apologies, acknowledgement, and truth-telling are already recognized among peace builders as important intercultural trust-building activities. Secondly, TRC reshaped narratives and debunking myths. It is an unfortunate fact that mass publics are not particularly critical in their views about identity and its supporting narratives and myths. They often take identity as intrinsic and thus relatively unchanging. Indeed, identities can be so important and emotionally charged that even suggesting that a person's identity is a construction may be perceived either as offensive or as simply untrue. Even if TRC initiatives were unlikely to change the deeply rooted opinions of mass publics in Aceh, they can do something about the most extreme forms of this phenomenon, which block any reflection on one's own complicity in crimes done in the name of one's group. Third, that the TRC can do is to encourage political learning or cooperation. The transitional periods are a time of enormous political learning, when new or reform institutions must learn how to govern in a political landscape in which social group and power structures involved may be different than they were before. Groups who have never worked together, possibly because one of them was formally excluded from power on the basis of identity, must now cooperate. TRC or KKR Aceh work within these dynamics. If they are designed in a thoughtful way, they might help groups learn how to work together from the grassroots to elite level. On the level of government, KKR or TRC may be one of the early cooperative initiatives for any new regime. In cases where new constitutional arrangement enshrine minority rights TRC may be an institutional site where those new rights and principles are tested and acted out. Lastly, the TRC's role can be potentially to recognize victims in the new way that resonates with their belief systems. Recognizing victims of violence, human rights abuses, including their humanity and their status as citizens with rights, is one of the main motivations for undertaking TRC at the first place. In the wake of identity-based abuses, recognizing the identities of the victims may be an important part of helping them regain their dignity. KKR Aceh or TRC can achieve this through attending to, and incorporating relevant religious and cultural traditions. So to conclude, because I'm pretty sure that you're quite exhausted with long talk, my presentation would like to highlight Aceh's transitional justice as a case where identity-based conflict can be managed through democratic means such as transitional justice, not only to redefine their belongingness in a nation called Indonesia, but most importantly to restore trust to the state and among members of the society, to gain dignity and justice, and in long terms, restoring the values of humanity and accountability. Aceh TRC or KKR Aceh is still a baby now. It has a long way to go, but already it gives a good lessons to the world that we need to learn, and therefore it needs all the support it needs to achieve its mission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Wayu. So, in the last two presentations, we've learned that solidarity against foreign invasion can be the basis of identity, as stated by Mr. Tsehaye, and we also learned from Ibu Ayu's presentation about how identity-based conflict can be handled with democracy, and if we emphasize on the accountability, justice, and humanity. So now we are open for the question and answer sessions. If you have questions, please raise your hand and state your name and also your questions. So anybody wants to ask to our panelists? Yeah, or after the gentleman over there, anybody wants to ask questions as well? Okay, so the gentleman over there.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Shafi Anwar. I am a lecturer at President University, but previously I was teaching at University Utara Malaysia, UUM, which led by Dato Mustafa, and it was Dato who invited me to be lecturer at the University Utara Malaysia, and having held there almost 7 years, I witnessed the success of UM under his leadership. So it's very, very interesting that tomorrow he will be giving public lecture here, and all of us will be able to learn how he maintained UM to be a successful university. First, this is the first. The second point is that I would like to convey my gratitude as well to all speakers here. A very distinguished speaker, and who give very significant contribution to our understanding about identity politics. My question is addressed to Dato first, and then second for Professor Matsuno. Okay, Dato, thank you very much for your very enlightening presentation. In this regard, I would like to relate my question with my research related to identity politics, both in Malaysia and Indonesia. As we have already known that identity politics is normal, natural, but the problem lies in the fact when identity politics is to be used for the sake of certain political interests. So in this regard, the identity politics lead to manipulation of identity politics for the sake of certain political interests. And there is a common phenomena in this regard, both in Malaysia and Indonesia, especially during the general election. We have already known that both people in political elite in Indonesia and Malaysia use identity politics for the sake of political interest. Just to give you example, in Indonesia, we just conducted election. We show that there is a meme or let's say hoax that Jokowi is anti-Islam, and then Prabowo is surrounded by radical Islam, etc., which is used to be very, very, very disturbing for all of us. My question to you is that, I remember that Francis Fukuyama, or just recently, I think, no, not recently, 2018, he declared that identity politics could be a threat to democracy, especially when it is manipulated by certain political elite. So my question is that, what factor causing this, especially in Malaysia and Indonesia, there is similarities. We have already known that this, Malaysia and Indonesia is serumpun, but there is similarities in using identity politics for the sake of political interest. That's my question, Dato. The second question is, I would like to comment related to Professor Matsuno. You did mention in your presentation that for institutionalizing tolerance, you did mention that, if possible, to spread within church and the state. It means it will lead to secular state, or at least secularization of politics. I am afraid that kind of concept could not be applied to Muslim countries, because we already know that Islam is totalistic religion, which cannot spread between mosque and state, and that Islam is very integrated society. So if secular state is to be implemented for the sake of institutionalizing tolerance in the Western country, could be work, but in Muslim country, it will totally be rejected, because Islam is a totalistic religion, and in this regard, which very, very common that Islam recognized Din, religion, dunya, daulah, which is totalistic integration of Islam as a religious teaching. That's my comment, and I would like to get your response. Thank you very much.
So next question would be from the gentleman over there in the front.
Terima kasih Bapak dan Ibu. Nama saya Letkol Mark Daly dan saya berasal dari Angkatan Laut Australia. I'll speak in Bahasa English. I'd like to first off take the opportunity to thank UPN Veteran di Jakarta untuk the invitation for myself and my 4 friends from Australia to attend this most interesting conference this morning. And I really would like to express my appreciation to the advice and the information provided by our 5 presenters this morning. I have a question for Dr. Philip Grange. Your presentation was most interesting, and you mentioned that military power influences the spread of language. So military power has an influence of the spread of language, and perhaps the best language is the language used by business. So there was 2 questions, 2 components. One is that military power has an impact on the spread of language throughout a country or an area, and the second is that perhaps the best form of language is that used by business. If you could elaborate on that, it would be much appreciated. Do you understand the question, Dr. Grange? So you mentioned that the military operations have an impact on how language is spread throughout an area. And then I think one of your slides said that the language of business, so business language, has an important impact on the language being used in an area. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. Thank you very much, and thank you all again for this opportunity.
So for the first question and answer session, we would like to give the floor to Mr. Dato and Matsuno to answer the first question.
Thank you very much, Pak Shafi, for the question. This is the real issue that we are facing. You know, your question about ethnicity and identity politics being used to mobilize or to exploit ethnic sentiments. This is very true. This is the real thing that we are facing in this world today. Despite globalization, and we are becoming more and more borderless, global community, and so on and so forth. Yet, at the same time, you can see this identity politics being played, being exploited, you know, from America. You ask Donald Trump, he know better about this. And you go to another part of the world, this part of the world, same thing happened. You go to China, also same thing happened. You know, how the Uyghur ethnic groups is facing a lot of terrible things in China, despite China is growing big as the world power. Yeah. So my point is very simply this: it is very, very hard, very, very difficult to dismantle this ethnicity from politics. It's very difficult. People have tried this before. You can see in the old Soviet Union for 70 years or so. Soviet Union, was under the communists. USSR, you never heard of USSR now anymore. We know Russia. They have several, small states with so many identities and so on. But after the collapse of communism back in the 90s, the last was Gorbachev, and during Boris Yeltsin era, you see the dismantling of Soviet Union, and the main result was, cause was identity. You know, people want to be Kazakhstan, they want to be known in their own identity. You look at Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia, after the collapse of Tito and the Communist Party, after so many years, 70 years, communism was used to depress and oppress people so that they forget about their identity. Everybody has to subscribe to communism. But later, when communism collapsed, when the Federation of Yugoslavia collapsed, you see the Balkan War. You see the Serbs and the Bosnian and the Croat, fighting one another. And of course, there are treaties, they have been peace treaty. They want to overcome this issue, but still, you go back to Bosnia, you go back to Yugoslavia, you can see this identity politics still going on. Yeah, in Malaysia, same thing. We have tried to dismantle ethnicity by promoting a non-ethnic political party, or we can call it multi-ethnic political party, so that political parties do not use ethnicity to mobilize political support. But unfortunately, even when you form a multi-ethnic political party, so-called multi-ethnic political party, it depends on who dominates that party. If the party is being dominated by one particular ethnic group, although it is called a multi-ethnic party, still, they are using ethnicity. Because if you study about ethnicity, it is a sentiment that is very easy, to be capitalized, to be manipulated, because you will touch on a deep feeling. You can arouse, people deep psychological feeling when you talk about their religion, their origin, their ethnicity. These things are a threat. Somebody else is coming to dominate you. You're going to lose your identity. Yeah, you no longer exist. You're going to lose your pride and so on. You're going to lose your language, or even you're going to lose your political dominance and so on. This is very easy to arouse ethnic sentiment in politics. So this is the real thing that we are facing, even in the U.S. U.S. is a developed country, but still you go there. The black community in America feel that they are a threat again under Trump. Yeah. So after how many years? And this populism, political populism, yeah, want to be populist in order to get support, to get you voted in as a leader and as a government. Well, this is the most easiest way to arouse and to mobilize political support. Same thing in Indonesia. I don't have to mention, you know better, you know. So this is the challenge that the world is facing at the moment. Until and unless we come to term with it, yeah, we try to understand that. Of course, we can live together with common purpose, despite the fact that we are coming from different ethnic groups, different ethnic communities. But the common purpose, common destiny, we can unite. You can practice your own, practices within your own ethnic community. You can eat your own food. You can practice your own religion and so on. But at the same time, we can attach ourselves much stronger collectively to the national interest than to the small collective interest. This is, how to strike a fine balancing act so that you can remain a Javanese or a Sundanese and Acehni, but at the same time, you identify yourself stronger as Indonesian. It can be done. Indonesia has proved it to some extent. And this is the thing that we hope that, can be done, that political leaders in particular in any part of the world must encourage, these living in diversity, living in multiple identity is not a problem. It's not a threat. It's not a challenge because we need to cooperate. We need to collaborate, and then we have to be tolerant and acceptance. We don't have to force people, to dismantle their own identity and so on. And that will make people feel more comfortable. But again, it is easier said than done. Easier said than done. It's not easy. What more when you allow ethnic-based political parties to flourish, to exist, and to use ethnicity as the means to gain political support. So this is a big challenge for leaders in any part of the world, and we should not allow this to continue and go on because it will destroy all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mustafa. The next question for Dr. Matsuno. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I think the question addressed to me was about the part in which I talked about Michael Waltzner's arguments that the state must be separated from church. He wrote this book on toleration in 1997, so 20 years ago, when a few years after the Berlin Wall collapsed, and then when we are talking about actively about ethnic conflicts rising in the Balkans and Africa, and then people talking about clash of civilizations vigorously. I think in that context he was writing this, and suddenly he had the United States as a typical Western secular type of state as a model, and then so in that context, I think it was reasonable at that stage that talking about separation between the church and state. But significantly, he is not saying that the religion has no place. Religion is not playing any role in politics. It does. And in Japan, for example, the constitution clearly says separation between the religion and state. No religious activities allowed to be performed under state arrangements, and so religion cannot be taught as such in public schools. But this is a particularly unique situation in Japan, I guess. Like in France, we have a very strict separation of religion and the state, because the reason is very different.
because Japan's aggression in World War II was pretty much associated with the Japanese unique religion Shintoism. So the state was stripped off this religious basis by the American occupation, and then subsequently the Constitution of Japan that was drafted mainly by the American experts clearly separated religion from the state. And it's now accepted by the many Japanese, I guess, and that's why but there's no big resistance to that at the moment. But now we know the Islam, but today's theme is intersection of local identity and global identity. But certainly Islam is one of the topics probably you have in mind when you talk about this kind of a topic. I think in any state, because of this globalization, we are talking about this identity, the globalizing context. So globalization means migration, and any society is becoming a more multi-ethnic and multi-religious. So what we should do with this globalization is certainly we have to think about how to cope with this diversity of religion, diversity of ethnicity in our own society. So now the model of nation state in the classic sense has limits in this case, and we have to think more about how to tolerate or alien elements or foreign elements or different elements in our own society. The Islamic country also should do this, and with its own way. I think Michael was also thinking about the Ottoman Empire as one of the 5 regimes of toleration, multinational empire, just like the Roman Empire before. Because empire inevitably comprises of many different ethnic groups. You naturally have to think about how to tolerate others in your own empire. Then, if you want to seek a model of toleration in Islamic society, certainly, I think the Ottoman Empire may be one point of reference. But of course, we are living in a contemporary modern system, so it shouldn't be the same. I think in Islamic society, how to deal with the different religious groups, it must be certainly discussed. Michael Watson doesn't have any answer to this type of a question, so this is particularly very perhaps important in Indonesia or maybe in Aceh. I don't have a clear answer, but the trend we have to confirm here is that we are globalizing at the moment, and then this globalization naturally forces us to think about your own system of toleration, and not just promoting an attitude of tolerance, which is of course moral based, but you have to think about the political arrangements in which tolerance has a place as a core value of this coming globalized world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is the question from Mr. Mark Daly to Professor Kong.
Okay, thank you. The question was about language for business and language, political and military strength. In fact, there is no opposition, but you may have a shift for a single language. You may have a shift through the history, and a language can absolutely change of status. Let's say, just like languages are living beings, I believe, so just like a human being, you can in your life have several different professions or status. So the same applies for language. Let's say language for business has empirical or pragmatical approach. It's a bottom from the bottom to the top. So when you arrive in a country, you want to do business with the local peoples, you just look for the language which is more appropriate. And this applies to Indonesia. When the Portuguese first came to Indonesia, and they wanted to purchase spices and so on. And so what language did they happen to learn? They learned Malay. I mean, let's say Bazar Malay is a very simple form of Malay, just to ensure they will do some business and buy the commodities they wanted to buy. But in fact, this is a pragmatical approach for business, and this is nobody decides what language will be used for business. This is just what seems the most economical way. But maybe they were not aware that Malay, before becoming a lingua franca for businessmen and merchants, it was the language of the empire, of the Sriwijaya Empire. So let's say Malay has shifted from a language of a dominant empire, which covered most of the island Southeast Asia, to long after Sriwijaya collapsed, the language was still there until Kupang, until Ambon, Manado, and whatever. So it's rather natural that its status shift to lingua franca for business. So you have, don't know the expression in English, you can shift from a political power language to business language. What happened in Europe is very special, because the language really became an issue of identity, of national identity, and people who speak French, they didn't want to speak German, not because the German is a bad language, it's a beautiful language, but they didn't want to speak German because this was the language of the Germans, and Germans was presented as enemies. And the same applied in Germany, of course. People didn't want to speak French because they hated French people at that time. So what happened in Europe is very special, because languages became an issue and an element, a key element of identity, and then a key element of nationalism. And we all know what happened when nationalism is rising. It's always very often finishes with wars. Okay, so it's a little bit pessimistic. Let's be optimistic. Globalization is going on, you're absolutely right. And we have now a super lingua franca, which is English, and hopefully there will be no issues with the language anymore.
Thank you so much. So in the interest of time, we will have to wrap up the question and answer session. But before that, I would like to ask one single final question, which can be answered with one word only, to all the speakers here. So, one word. So do you think, what is the most important principle to ensure that the integration of local and global identity is done in peaceful manner? So one question, one word. What is the most important principle to ensure that the integration of local and global identity can happen in a peaceful manner? So, starting from Iwayu.
That's easy. Dignity.
Respect. Acceptance and tolerance.
I think it is experience. I don't say anything about the goal, but this is a procedure, pathway to the goal. So you need experience. You need to accumulate experience. You have to go global by yourself, travel around the world and see other societies, and you come back here and then you think, integration by yourself. So experience is important.
I will take again the examples of France and Germany. In last century, 2 world war was triggered by the hostility between France and Germany, and hopefully this cannot happen again. This cannot happen again because tolerance and globalization, and also efforts of the French and the German who said, no, we will not make a 3rd World War or 4th World War. We have to stop that and to stop to kill all our young boys in this, okay. And they did efforts, and for instance, in Europe, you had the Erasmus program, exchanges of students and so on. And this is the way we have to know each others, and this is the best insurance to avoid conflicts, wars, and to have a better integration. Just if something goes wrong, the globalization may stop, and then if it stops, you go back to old-time nationalism, and that would not be good for all of us. Thank you.
Okay, so just to wrap up, so basically based on all these discussions, we can see that identity consists of multiple variables and components, such as history, ethnicity, language, and even conflicts. So it is a paradox in a way that it is both a result and also an ongoing process. And in the process, it involves a lot of concepts related to dignity, respect, acceptance, experience, and also education. So it's been a pleasure to moderate you today, so I'll end it with one more puns or pantun. Roses are red, violets are blue. Thank you for those who have attended. It is a pleasure for JICoSSH to host you. Thank you.
Thank you. Much appreciated for all inspiring speakers and our moderator, Ms. Khairanisa.
Ladies and gentlemen, started with the opening ceremony in the morning up to this last session in the afternoon. We are now about to conclude the whole agenda.
Before closing the program, I would like to inform you that we will have a short break and continue by lunch that will be served at Muhammad Yamin Building, Visip A in room 101. Bahwa makan siang akan tersedia di Gedung Muhammad Yamin Visip A, ruang 101, and the committee will direct you to Muhammad Yamin Building.
And as informed that after the lunch, the parallel session will start at 2nd floor and 3rd floor in Muhammad Yamin Building. For those who attend the parallel session, all sessions will be start at 1:30 p.m. Again, 1:30 p.m. After having break and lunch, you may proceed to your designated presentation room. Setelah makan siang, sesi paralel akan berlangsung di Gedung Muhammad Yamin, lantai 2 dan lantai 3. Bagi yang akan hadir di sesi paralel, sesi ini akan dimulai pukul 1.30.
And finally, we have come to the end of the program, of the morning program. To sadly conclude this event, let us reciting Hamdalah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your presence and your kind attention. We would like to thank you and hope to gain something from this fruitful morning program on this event. See you at the end of the parallel session. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.